First off, excuse me. First off, I'd like to thanks with my heart Angela and Saska and Andrea and Joran for organizing this wonderful conference and for inviting me to speak. I haven't been to Milan in 3 or 4 years, so it's been a kind of a withdrawal experience for me. And the document that I'm going to be talking about this afternoon, I discovered right before COVID. And so when COVID came, I was kind of shut out for various reasons from Milan. And so, and I don't know how long this is going to last, but nonetheless, I've got this document. So I'm going to give you kind of a broad stroke view of this partnership this afternoon. So large-scale commercial bookselling in early modern Italy compelled merchants to sell their wares aggressively and creatively. They confronted a problem not unlike what present-day publishers, notwithstanding internet sales and mass advertising, what they confront, and that is finding enough customers and retail outlets for mass-produced objects. Late Renaissance booksellers addressed this problem in multiple ways. They set up branch offices and created commercial networks, both national and transnational. They advertised in catalogs, sold at fairs, hired itinerant salesmen, repackaged books in attractive formats, and extended credit to more and more customers, as we just heard. They also created partnerships in order to share risk, raise capital, and conduct business from multiple shops in diverse cities. Frequently, these associations involve the publication and sales of deluxe, high-priced volumes, such as liturgical and legal texts. The largest publishing partnership from late 16th century, the Societas Aquilae, for example, brought together no fewer than 14 printers and booksellers, most of them Venetian, who invested 30,000 Venetian ducats for the publication of law books in 1571. So my paper this afternoon discusses the creation of a bookselling partnership hitherto unknown to scholars of the early modern Italian book trade. In 1588, the Venetian publisher Francesco de Franceschi entered into a partnership with the Milanese bookseller publisher Giovanni Antonino della Antoni for the purpose of selling a large quantity of books from a shop in Milan. When Antoni passed away in 1590, the heirs of his estates dissolved the partnership. Subsequently, Franceschi sold his share of the books, the overwhelming majority of which were published in Venice, to other local book merchants. Franceschi's legal representative in Milan finalized the terms of the sale in 1592 in a contract that includes a detailed inventory of the books written out on 32 leaves of paper. You can see the first sheet of the inventory here. Now preserved in the State Archive in Milan, the list records 8,750 copies of books organized by format, size, and whether the texts were bound, legati, or unbound in sheets, sciolti. It is, to my knowledge, the single largest documented collection of a Venetian bookseller's stock for sale on the Milanese market during the 16th century. As such, it offers an exceptional look at Franceschi's business and sales strategy in the context of his partnership with Antoni. Like other successful publishers who operated out of late 16th century Venice, Francesco de Franceschi Senese, because he came from Siena, established mature commercial networks throughout Italy by aggressively extending his business activities in cities up and down the peninsula. His myriad publishing ventures in Bergamo, Bologna, Ferrara, Modena, Pavia, Verona, and Siena are all well documented by the Edit 16 database. It is highly likely, even in the absence of documentary evidence, that he either partnered with local merchants or installed his own operatori in those cities to manage and sell his stocks of books from warehouses and shops. From 1561 to 1591, Franceschi published no fewer than 307 editions, specializing in scientific, legal, and technical subjects such as medicine, math, physics, military science, astronomy, and law. Many of those editions are conspicuous in the stocks of books he sold in the context of this partnership. Archival evidence of business activity between Giovanni and Antonino dell'Antoni and Franceschi prior to 1588 is scarce. Nonetheless, it is hard not to imagine that these two had conducted business at some point during the 1580s, if not earlier. The Antoni firm had deep roots in the Venetian book industry. Prior to settling down in Milan in 1553, Giovanni Antonio dell'Antoni da Sabio, the elder, the founder of the firm, had conducted business with his father Antonino in the San Giuliano parish in Venice, where Franceschi nothing. Oh, there it is. I guess I have to press. So he had conducted a business with his father in the San Giuliano parish in Venice, where Franceschi would set up a store in 1560. In 1552, the Venetian publisher Melchior Sessa had made Antoni his procuratore, or legal representative, of Milan, and in the following year, Antoni had entered into a 5-year partnership with Caterina Resta, who recently had become the widow of the bookseller Pietro Antonio Sessa, who was Melchior Sessa's nephew, to manage Sessa's erstwhile shop, Al Segno del Leone, it's a sign of the lion, and share the profits with Caterina's son. Matrimonial alliances, as you can see from this chart, also solidified Antoni's business connections with Venetian bookmen. In 1556, he married Benedetta Somasco, the eldest daughter of Vincenzo Somasco, a publisher and bookseller who had recently moved his publishing operation from Pavia to Venice. And in 1568, Antoni arranged for the marriage of his nephew, Giovanni Antoni, to Somasco's youngest daughter, Clara. In 1580, Antoni appointed Giovanni Battista Somasco, a relative of Vincenzo, to be his legal representative in Venice to collect debts from the bookseller Bartolomeo Carampello, who had purchased books and paper from Antoni. 3 years after his death in 1583, Antoni the Elder estimated the net worth of his business to be just over 152,000 lire Milanese. So he was a major player in the 16th century book trade. Of that amount, 101,000 lira comprised Antoni's stocks of books and related supplies in Milan, and a much smaller amount, 15,800 lire, included bills of exchange, as well as books sold by the firm outside Milan, presumably in branch stores, probably one in Venice. The remaining value, some 32,512 lira, or 20%, included credits outstanding, most of which were owed by the firm's customers in Milan. At Antoni's request, the wooden sign of the Griffin, which he had been using as his publishing mark since 1558, which he bought from a local paper stationer, which is a whole other different story. So he began using the sign of the Griffin very early on in his career. That became the wooden sign of the family shop and his publishing sign as well. And we know that Antoni had a large shop under the Arengario, which by 1593 was located next to the Bank of St. Ambrose in the Piazza dei Mercanti, the central commercial square of Milan. So it was probably from this store, from the major big downtown store of Antoni, where this partnership took place. Antoni the Elder's cousin, so, whoops, have to go back. So it was, I don't know if you can see that. I guess you can't see that, that's okay. Giovanni the Elder's cousin, Giovanni Antoni dell'Antoni, and Francesco de Franceschi launched their partnership in 1588. On 7th of May of that year, Franceschi appointed Giovanni Battista Ciotti, a Venetian publisher and also of Sienese origin, to be his legal representative in Milan. By this date, Franceschi was running a bookshop in Milan, Al Segno della Pace, in the central commercial square. So presumably he was counting on Ciotti to collect debts from customers of that shop and perhaps also take an active role in the company's business partnership with Antoni. Unfortunately, I've been unable to locate the original partnership agreement between these two, which of course would provide important information regarding sales, how profits would be divided, procedures for stocking and inventory control, as well as other details regarding extending credit, purchasing books from third parties, and perhaps even bookbinding practices. In any event, 2 days after Antoni's death, on 8th of September 1590, an inventory was made of his household belongings, including a declaration of the current investment in books made by each partner, totaling the large sum of 24,521 lire for each one. The partnership makes clear that the document makes clear that the partnership had been operating from one shop. Franceschi himself may have come to Milan after Antoni's death to help settle his accounts. In fact, one Francesco Senese, age 45, is listed in 1590 as living in Milan in the parish of San Fermo. On 18 January 1591, Franceschi and his heirs to Antoni's estate dissolved the partnership. 10 days later, Franceschi sold his share of the books remaining in the former company to the Milanese merchants Giovanni Pietro and Ordinero Lemonta. In a handwritten statement, the brothers pledged their own property as collateral for the purchase of the books. And you can see the contract right here. This is a sheet from the contract involving the sale of Franceschi's books. The sales price for the books was 12,500 lire, and the brothers promised that they would make a down payment of 1,000 lire. Clearly, these brothers were capitalizing on a situation where Franceschi could not continue selling his merchandise in Milan and was willing to sell it at a steep discount. An inventory of the books written out on 32 leaves of paper survives in this notarial contract. The inventory, as I said, records approximately 8,750 copies of books arranged by format and whether the text was bound or unbound, and most interestingly, whether it was found in bottega or in casa. Other categories on the inventory include specific designations such as libri rotti in casa, damaged books in the house, libri vecchi stampati, old books, libri usati, secondhand books, libretti in cartone, school books bound in cardboard, and rossi e neri legati, bound works of liturgy and devotion printed in red and black. Angelo Nuovo's extensive research of Italian bookshops from this period has shown that books were often arranged on shelves according to the format size, with large folios displayed on the upper shelves and smaller formats arranged below in descending order, with the smallest on the bottom shelf. The designation in casa indicates that a fraction of the books, by my calculation, about 30% of the stock, were stored in a rental space, presumably in a house in the parish of San Michele al Gallo, where Carampello had taken up residence. The remaining 70% were found probably, as I said, in Antoni's large shop. Of the total number of books in stock, about 70%, 6,164, were unbound, with the remaining 30% already given a binding. Nearly 40% of these were folios and quartos, as well as a smaller fraction, about 10%, of duodecimos and sedecimos. Much the largest fraction of bound books, about 50%, were small octavos, some of Franceschi's least expensive stock. Most of the bound books are described as in bottega and thus ready for a quick sale, and there's no doubt that Franceschi and Antoni would have provided a binding service for their customers. The compiler of the inventory followed a uniform method for recording the bibliographic and physical features of each volume, since the purpose of redacting the list was to provide both the seller and the buyers an accurate description of the merchandise. Unfortunately, the price for each book was not recorded, perhaps because the Lemonta and Franceschi had already settled on a sales price for the entire stock. Entries commonly include the number of copies of the text followed by the first or last name of the author and or the title of the book, often abbreviated, followed by the format. Much less often, the place of publication or condition of the text was added, especially if the book was damaged or old or incomplete and published outside Venice. The most common number of copies for each text is one, but not surprisingly, several titles have two or more. One section described as libretti in cartone, one finds 50 copies of Abbacchini, a commercial literacy text, and 68 copies of libretti diversi. Popular works of prayer and devotion are recorded in large numbers. For example, 140 copies of the Office of the Madonna described as vecchio and sold in small octavo and duodecimo formats, and 32 octavo copies of the Sette Salme published in Piacenza. Other entries indicate a sales strategy where Franceschi had purchased stock in quantity from local booksellers, such as from Giacomo Picaglia, on behalf of the partnership, including 130 copies of Gabriele Alessandri's Adversos Hereticos and various other books that I'm not going to go into. There's also 34 copies of Paolo Perafecino's treatise on the medicinal benefits of baths, located in the Valtellina, a thin quarto printed in Milan by Giovanni Antonio Castiglione in 1545, described by the compiler as De Termis Vecchio and Rotto in Casa. Scanning the inventory, one is impressed by the extraordinary selection of titles recorded: legal, liturgical, devotional, historical, political, medical, educational, musical, and so on. While it documents a sizable number of Franceschi's own publications, as well as several titles published in Antwerp, Basel, Cologne, Frankfurt, Lyon, Piacenza, and Rome, the list overwhelmingly consists of Venetian imprints published by him and his associates over the past 3 decades. Such titles were rarely, if ever, published in Milan, so literate Milanese had to seek them out in larger bookstores, above all in Antoni's store or this store of the partnership. Franceschi specialized in legal publishing, so it's not surprising to find hundreds of folio and quarto-sized copies covering all points of civil, criminal, and canon law. The texts were in high demand among Milan's judges, jurists, notaries, government and church officials, professors, and their students. Among the most expensive texts in his stock, they also fetched the largest profits, and I've been able to find several texts that were published by Franceschi that show up in this inventory, including this one by Tiberio Deciani, a Tractatus Criminalis that he published in 1590. And you can see, or maybe not see, Franceschi's sign of the peace, a woman holding, it's hard to see, but there's pox there in her hand. The inventory also betrays a strategy of appealing to niche markets. One of these was music. Until the 1580s, Milan remained a minor center for musical publishing compared to the large output of musical texts in Venice, whose presses dominated the field. Franceschi never published polyphonic music, but judging from an inventory of 173 books sent by him to Milan in 1563 that includes 18 different editions of musical texts, it's clear that he actively pursued this genre in Venice for resale in cities throughout Italy. Milan proved no exception. The compiler of the inventory noted 508 copies de libri di musica, without bothering to identify a title or the author, presumably because the texts were more easily identified than others in the store. The Franceschi Antoni company catered as well to a much smaller market for texts published in Spanish. Milan's Spanish community accounted for a small fraction of the city's residents, which included primarily the Spanish governor and other representatives of the Spanish crown, their entourage and a personal guard of 200 soldiers, and a larger community of soldiers and their families, as many as 2,000 men and women lodged inside the walls of the Sforza castle. With a relatively small number of Spanish readers in the city, it's unsurprising that Milanese printers issued only 17 editions of Spanish works from 1550 to 1590. In 1592, Franceschi had in stock 44 copies of 33 titles of Spanish texts, 11 of these bound, legati, and the rest stored in loose sheets. Rather than write out each title in Spanish, the compiler of the list recorded each one in Italian, most likely because he wanted to be consistent in recording each and every entry in the Italian language. The titles encompass a variety of subject and interests: chivalric romances, histories, chronicles, religious works, popular literature, comedies, and texts of current events. Not a few of these texts show that Franceschi was selling older stock published in Venice and elsewhere, including Spain, from the 1520s through mid-century. Also noteworthy among Franceschi's stocks of books is a section described as Libri Hebrei, which records 19 copies of Hebrew texts stored in the house rented by the partnership. And you can see them, they are on the left, and they go down the page. The markets for these texts were very small indeed. During the last half of the 16th century, the Jewish population living in the state of Milan, estimated by Professor Maifreda to be no more than 890 in 1590, fell victim to a deteriorating political and religious climate that led to their expulsion from the state of Milan in 1597. Such repressive measures taken by the Spanish authorities toward Jewish book production, including expurgation and destruction of Hebrew books, as well as confiscation of goods and financial punishment for holders of unauthorized or objectionable Hebrew texts, irreparably damaged Hebrew publishing throughout Lombardy, especially in Milan. Such was not the case, however, after 1563 in Venice, whose government, with notable exceptions, was generally tolerant of Hebrew publishing. Franceschi never published Hebrew books, but surely bought and sold them on the Venetian market before coming to Milan and launching the partnership with Antoni. Of the 21 copies in his possession, 11 were Hebrew grammars, including one octavo copy by Marco Marini, a Hebraist and interpreter for the Venetian Republic, 3 copies of a book described as being by Rabbi Moshe, which is probably or possibly a reference to Rabbi Moses Kimhi, who flourished during the 12th century, who was a grammarian and biblical exegete, whose grammar was published by the Petrie firm in Basel in 1536, 6 copies of a Hebrew grammar published in Basel, and 1 octavo grammar described as De Nomine Variae Hebrorum. In addition, Franceschi stocked Hebrew dictionaries described as Vecchi, 1 Thesaurus, a large folio volume of Psalms printed in 4 languages, including Hebrew, a bilingual copy of the New Testament in Hebrew and Latin, and a Sedicimo text described vaguely as Libro and 16 Hebreo. Elsewhere in the inventory, the compiler noted 2 quarto copies of Hebrew Bibles already bound and kept in the house, purposely away perhaps from the watchful eyes of the local inquisitors who would have confiscated them, since they were banned on all papal indices of prohibited books since 1559. So many, if not most of these texts suggest a small clientele who made a living teaching elementary Hebrew, as well as literate Jews and Christians who cultivated an interest in Hebrew language and literature. Other documentary evidence provides further insight into the company's practice regarding sales. When Franceschi and Antoni's heirs dissolved the partnership, there remained the thorny issue of settling the company's debts and credits outstanding during the past 2 years. Franceschi himself had extended 980 lire in credit to 45 different individuals, each credit ranging from 16 soldi to as much as 150 lire. Notable among the book-buying customers who ran up these debts were Giovanni Battista Visconti, who ran up a debt of 150 lire, Cardinal Paolo Emilio Sfrondati, Count Alessandro de Ro, the physician-author Lodovico Sitala, then the physician-author Giovanni Battista Salvatico, the notaries Achille Primanungo and Giovanni Battista Crivelli, and the Venetian publisher bookseller Barezzo Barezzi. Many of these loans, moreover, belong to local priests and high-ranking members of the church, too many obviously to mention here. So clearly Franceschi and no doubt Antoni were extending credit to a variety of customers from diverse social and professional backgrounds with different literary tastes. Such a strategy allowed the company to ratchet up overall volume of sales and encourage repeat business, a calculation that was essential to the cost and risk of conducting a business on a large scale. So in conclusion, while the inventory of Francesco de Franceschi's books compiled in early 1592 offers a snapshot of his investment after the closing of his partnership with Antoni, it cannot provide a picture of his initial investment in 1588, and thus it cannot present a dynamic view of the business over time. Without further archival evidence, moreover, the nature and extent of each partner's role in the company must remain speculative. Even with this limitation, the substantial size and scope of Franceschi's stock and trade indicates a complex operation involving skilled workers at all levels of operation. One overarching question lingers. What did both Franceschi and Antoni stand to gain, besides profit from sales, from a partnership designed to sell thousands of their own books from a single shop in the commercial heart of Milan? Beyond the most obvious of these, expanding the potential customer base, eliminating or reducing expensive shipping costs and fees, using the shop as a source of business information and advertisement, the partnership, and this is especially true for Franceschi, allowed him and his operatore to maintain a finger on the pulse of Milan's book consumers, making it easier for them to identify changes in consumer demand and satisfy more quickly the variable tastes of readers. This is particularly relevant considering that by the late 16th century, the explosion of print had led to larger, more diverse, and more sophisticated readers who wanted and were more curious about a wider variety of titles which Milanese publishers could not satisfy. Franceschi then filled this void with an extraordinary selection of titles published from his own presses and other Venetian publishers. Thus, we should think of Franceschi's business in the context of his partnership as a smaller version of the Venetian book industry writ large, a large commercial emporium, to use the words of Angelo Nuovo, that utterly dominated the book trade in 16th century Italy. Thank you very much.